So when it comes to constructing skills, then it's definitely a game of quality over quantity. But what we're seeing in the marketplace is there's a race to quantity, right? Like everybody's bloating and saying, look at my repo, I've got 10,000 skills, right? So for example, if there's a lot of bloat out there and everybody's just racing to produce, skills en masse, it seems as though there's a high probability that many of those skills are just going to be mediocre at best. How is it that you can spot a mediocre skill, or how is it that somebody's to evaluate which is a good one and which one isn't?
Don't be too exhaustive. You do need to have at least one workflow in mind. Let's say you have a BI platform with APIs to do everything. It wouldn't be proper to write a skill for the whole API surface. You want to write a skill for query, a skill for moving things around, a skill for exploring the catalog, workflows.
To some degree, to have a good skill, there needs to be somebody who's an expert in that, doing that.
Your skill has got to be good. You win the governance game by being the best provider of value. Somebody who doesn't like what you have to offer, all they have to do is find another skill elsewhere and start using that one instead.
Let's make sense of this.
Let's make sense.
Sensemakers.
Everybody's racing to build skills for their agents, right? So the race is on and skills are really hot right now. But I'm a little bit concerned that maybe there's too much slop going into these things because it's very cheap to use Gen AI to program and to create skills. And that the pace at which they're being constructed might be faster than the pace that the organizations are learning how to evaluate whether they're actually helping or not.
I think you're spot on with the problem. We need to have a measure of governance and quality control because it is so easy to generate what passes as a skill. But what you need to evaluate is it actually useful?
Right. Okay. So what is a skill? A skill, like it's more than just a prompt at a chat window, right? Like, so the skill is something that you give to an autonomous agent that should ideally increase its agency and its judgment so that it can act on its own.
Yeah, a great place to start with a mental model is imagine you're doing a lot of work with an AI agent, and every time you want the agent to do the work right, you need to write a paragraph of instructions to give it all the information it needs to do it right. Well, next time it would be easier to have a file with the same paragraph and you just call it. You copy paste or you introduce the file in the chat and then say, hey, agent, do this. That saved you so much work. Now, there are many tasks that need pages upon pages of instructions for the agent to really get all the context that's needed. And at that point, you need to wrap it in a skill.
Okay, so agents are using skills. Everybody's wrapping skills. A skill can mean various different things, but it's not necessarily that's the case that more skills means better outputs.
It doesn't. It doesn't mean that's the case. That's right. So let's also model a scenario where we have two people working with agents. One of them is an expert at something like the Tableau REST API, and the job is, hey, do some automation in Tableau Server. Well, the expert will know how to type the right instructions. That same expert can write the skill, so the second person, when they come in, they can invoke the skill and say, hey, agent, help me get a list of my data sources. Just with that one-liner. Well, the agent has everything else, all the context that it needs to make those API calls, thanks to the skill.
Got it. Okay. So I guess what I'm wondering is how do we evaluate then what makes the difference between a good skill and a bad skill? So for example, if there's a lot of bloat out there and everybody's just racing to produce, skills en masse, it seems as though there's a high probability that many of those skills are just going to be mediocre at best. How is it that you can spot a mediocre skill, or how is it that somebody's to evaluate which is a good one and which one isn't?
It's pretty likely, right, Jonathan? I think it's likely you might find it to something that passes, but isn't that helpful? So I think you've seen it before too. Somebody can have an agent and tell them, hey, go to this website where the documentation is and just copy paste everything. That's the skill. Let's just get the website and put it into the right format and we're done.
I think another piece for me with this is curation of the skill. And that to some degree, to have a good skill, there needs to be somebody who's an expert in that, doing that. And the AI is not necessarily, even if it's reading the wealth of information that's out there, how does it curate to make sure that the most important information is up front? Or the if there's three different ways to build something, what's the one that's best for our organization?
Right. So that domain expertise, right? So I think we've all experienced the LLMs and AIs can be very good at being confident, but there's a difference between confidence and correctness. And so the expert who's authoring the skill is going to be the one who makes that discernment around correctness.
Agreed. And I remember Jonathan brought this up before, but it's not that difficult for someone to go and copy a set of a website with documentation that wasn't intended to be written for agents in the first place and call it a day. But you do want an expert in this domain to say, from this huge website of documentation, what are the pieces that we need and in what order to get the results that we want.
And I think that order piece is really key. Also, because, and it goes to something we've talked about, Stefan, with the need to have a useful structure and nesting the different skills that we have for more complex topics, so we're not overloading the context window of our agents.
Right. And then sequence also plays a role because ideally the skill is the thing that teaches the agent to do one job well. And so it's narrowly focused. Ideally, that can really address an entire workflow, perhaps. And sequencing is really important with respect to that workflow. So it's not just kind of encoding the domain expertise of the expert within the organization into the skill and the sequence of how that stuff is structured and the architecture within it, but also just a coherence of the entire package. Right? Because that context window is so constrained and so susceptible to overwhelm, being able to do more with less in a coherent way in the structure and the architecture of how the skill is constructed, I think is going to make a big difference.
I want to actually emphasize that word, or you just said compress meaning. And that's one of the differentiators of expertise when writing a skill, because somebody who doesn't have enough experience might not know the right keywords to use in the business to say many things with just one approach. So like the word headless BI is a whole architectural philosophy and way of doing things. So if you know what that means, you can compress a lot of meaning. Now, when you're giving agent instructions, it's also useful to know the vocabulary of an analyst for the agent to do analytics effectively.
Right. And when you know that vocabulary, you can compress the same meaning in fewer words, have tighter semantics, and thereby prevent the agent from becoming confused or overwhelmed by too much context.
Yeah, this might be worth a whole other episode. It's so deep, but there's a line of research looking at priming agents with personalities. And in the past, you'd have to tell the agent, hey, you're a very thorough analyst that never makes mistakes, and you always cross every T and dot every I. And you gave it this whole life story before you started. But a lot of research is saying, even if you don't believe in these models of the human mind, there's these personality models like your INTP, Myers-Briggs. So if you tell the agent your INTP something, you're placing it in the training data distribution where you want it to be without having to write a whole paragraph. Like you can prime the personality by using Myers-Briggs.
Very effectively, and that's meaning compaction.
Meaning compaction. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, so when it comes to constructing skills, then it's definitely a game of quality over quantity. But what we're seeing in the marketplace is there's a race to quantity, right? Like everybody's bloating and saying, look at my repo, I've got 10,000 skills, right? On our public repo, we've got one skill, right? We don't have 10 or 20 or 30 of them yet because we're not playing that game. We're playing the quality game. And I think that really is the point, is that in this race to be effective with AI, it's not necessarily about more skills is better outcomes. It's about the ability to understand and dissect the business and construct these things in a way that's going to compact that meaning and make the agent more effective and more autonomous with better judgment.
And that judgment part is pretty critical as far as building trust in that output. Because in the sense of sometimes I think about like there's dog years and human years, and now we have AI years, which are like even more rapid than dog years. And once that trust is gone, people are going to look for something else. And so if they tried the skill and it didn't work, that time when they were really depending on it, they're that much more likely to just go to something else, somebody else's skill, some other batch of received wisdom from the organization or so on, or build their own skill. So in that way, having that, and there's one more part for me here, is that relative amount of comprehensiveness of skills too, is like, because somebody could build a skill and like, how many different ways can we build a Tableau data source, for example, since we do a lot of Tableau work historically. And the skill might be made to work with like a single table data source. Great. What happens when somebody starts using joins, relationships, composable data sources, and so on? Is it going to be able to handle that or not?
And also in practice, because we've seen this in real life, it's not enough to just say, hey, I'm the governance team and you got to use my skills and throw a fit when every time nobody uses your skill has got to be good. You win the governance game by being the best provider of value. Somebody who doesn't like what you have to offer, all they have to do is find another skill elsewhere and start using that one instead.
Got it. Okay, so every team's going to have their own practices, their own approach. What is it that they can use? Like, Stefan, what identifies a good skill then? If we've identified what doesn't work, what are the architectural ingredients or components of a skill that is of high quality?
Well, let me share this with you. You guys need to check this out because skills are so hot right now. We had AI Engineer World's Fair happening last week, and skills emerged as one of the top themes of the conference. So a lot of people are talking about it. Now, there's a great article summarizing some of these thoughts from a man called Laurie Voss. I recommend you look into him. I think he was very involved with NPM. Now, one of the main things he warns about that everybody's realizing, the big danger with skills is that you're not supposed to ask the model to write its own skill. You're just reinforcing the training data and the biases. If the agent can't do the job without a whole bunch of skill instructions, then the training data is not enough. And if you're asking it to write its own skill, you're just reinforcing those mistakes.
You're reinforcing that feedback loop.
You're not really breaking it from not being able to just do the job. So big no. Don't ask it to write itself. And also, don't be too exhaustive. You do need to have at least one workflow in mind. Let's say you have a BI platform with APIs to do everything. It wouldn't be proper to write a skill for the whole API surface. You want to write a skill for querying, a skill for moving things around, a skill for exploring the catalog, workflows.
Got it. So a skill is something that helps an AI agent do one thing well.
One thing well, and you could have a few in the skill set. So if it needs to combine them, that's how the agent will be able to do so. But many times it doesn't need everything. It just needs one of them.
And I think that's where this word primitive comes in, right? Because if the skill is something that helps the agent do one thing well, then that's a primitive, and the agent can use various skills and compose those primitives in order to accomplish its job. And the whole purpose is that collection of high quality skills has then increased the agency and the efficacy of the agent so that it can act on its own by working with these one thing well primitives.
Yeah, and this is your IP as a team, as an organization. It's so valuable because it also means, hey, this model provider is getting too expensive. We need to use something else. Or the company is finally deciding that we need to own our intelligence more. Okay, so the model is replaceable because the knowledge is actually something that's outside of the model that you control.
Right. So if as an organization, we've constructed our set of high caliber, high quality skills, that's our institutional IP that belongs to us. and we can sub out the underlying model that the agents are operating with based on cost and efficacy, without necessarily being constrained to our intelligence has been outsourced to this model provider that we're purchasing it from.
You're not sending all your information to an external provider and then becoming reliant on it.
Another way I've been thinking about this since we're a data podcast and not just writing code podcast is single source of truth. That's kind of been our holy grail in the data world, is that in the organization we have a single source of truth. And to me, part of good skill design and organization is each skill is doing this limited set of things well, and we're not overlapping multiple skills trying to do the same thing.
Well, that's where something that might change from organization to organization, where we will end up discovering what the right mix is. Because I've also seen situations where you have a effort to have the single source of truth for the entire company, and then teams writing their own subset of skills that build on top of it, or really just their own reality, because they need to perform their jobs. Now, if you're at the higher level of governance, that network effect might make you nervous, but it's also a strength, because you can learn from these local teams and incorporate it into your canonical version that should be higher quality. But what it shouldn't necessarily be a dictatorship. That's not good agents architecture. Just because you say so, we spent $200,000 on this data catalog, everybody has to use it, is not the winning strategy.
Right. So I'm seeing kind of a federated model where the enterprise might have its skills, but then at the local or the state level, there's an increased kind of narrowness of focus or nuance that's required. And this is also where these marketplaces are coming to be.
Yeah, we keep coming to it, but it's very much like the Tableau world that many of the viewers of the channel know already. And you have that. You would have the governed data sources, teams would build their own or sometimes take it in their own direction. And it wasn't perfect. Maybe with this new set of tooling, it could be more seamless. And there are reasons to be concerned. The people are kind of doing their own thing, but it's also important to see it as the strength that it is.
I think one piece for me is this notion of encoding how organizations work. And we have this whole new opportunity that historically that encoding was locked in. Okay, maybe it's how the Tableau workbook is computing something, or it's locked in some documentation, some PDF somewhere and out there. And skills are a new way to do this encoding of how we work in a way that's much more shareable. Like ideally, those skills are in a GitHub repo and everybody can get the latest repo later. They can contribute pull requests to it and so on, and really help the organization advance and not be so dependent on what is locked into an Excel workbook or somebody's head or so on.
Yeah, huge. Okay, and so there's a real differentiation then between the mediocre skills and the good skills. The good skills do a specific job. They're architecturally coherent. They're lean. They reflect real domain expertise that comes from an expert that's applicable inside of this organization. They're designed for reuse. Ideally, they can be governed and evaluated for their effectiveness. I mean, I think if we're talking about these skills becoming a new kind of primitive for organizational analytics, we really want for the skill itself to be able to be held to a certain standard of evaluation for accuracy and effectiveness. And we also want to be able to govern these things. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, that is very right. A good pattern to keep in mind for governance is the work that is being done on what's called a marketplace. And this is something that I've set up before. It's a good way to organize your skills. So it creates that network effect a lot easier. It means that as an organization, you can have a marketplace for people to discover your skills, install them on your agents. So if you needed a place for people to gather and come to and have a source of truth, this is a good way to do so. If your skills repo already has this in place is an indicator of quality. It means that you're enterprise ready. That's what it means.
And it seems like from Jonathan's single source of truth perspective, this marketplace is going to be the medium on which we determine which are the skills that do the best job at workflow X. Those are going to be the ones that have the most activity, the highest repos, the highest numbers of likes. And it's going to surface that actually this is the thing that does that one job best.
It is, and it's so well designed for its job because it allows for a bigger marketplace that could be the enterprise definition of things, and maybe you have a division or team that needs to do things in a more local way. If they also have their own marketplace of skills and plugins, they connect to each other. They do cross promotion. If you already have the main enterprise one, you can discover the smaller ones and install what they have. So it gives you the actual network to work on top of.
Got it. And so I suppose what you're saying is that in the absence of a marketplace like this, then it's more of an ungoverned landscape because every analyst or every team is just sort of haphazardly making their skills and using them. And there's no sort of central rigor or construction around the sharing of those things or the observability of which ones are being used and which ones are effective or not. And ineffective skills or incompetent skills could be actually increasing the amount of fragmentation within the organization as opposed to decreasing it.
Yes, exactly. So this would be a good place to get governance on your skill strategy 100%.
So we've talked about what makes a bad skill, what makes a good skill. We've talked some about governance. So if we take a step back, like when people are thinking about this, what is the most important part of this to be working on right now?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the most important thing to be working on right now is caliber and quality in the skills. Not getting sucked into this race to quantity or race to the bottom of, I've got the biggest, skills collection in my tool server, and therefore I'm expecting better results. But more narrowly focusing on quality. Governance is scary. Governance is difficult. I would expect that it'll be a while before we even have a handle on how best to govern skills within an organization. But at least having an eye towards the necessity for that while focusing on quality, to me, seems like the next immediate step.
I agree with that. And you will probably not be able to stop the flood of skills being used and written in the organization of varying levels of quality. You're going to have to be in the exercise of organizing that. It seems like from this conversation, one of the big elements to be aware of is that you need to yourself be the high quality center of high quality skills. The users will be able to tell that your skills have real evals and whatever they found online was maybe written by an agent. So definitely don't worry about quantity, the first to go to Slack or LinkedIn, but in what shape should the skills be? Should they maybe be a marketplace? And then how many do we really need? We need to evaluate and vet these.
In a lot of ways, what I picked up, what you were saying earlier, Stefan, is that less is more, right? So more skills can really just amplify the volume of noise, and finding the way to be more effective with fewer inputs is the key.
It is. We got a little bit of work to do on our own skill as well. We're still looking for room for improvement. So your feedback is very welcome, and we can probably pass some installation instructions at the bottom if you want to get ahead of the episode where we talk in depth about how the skill works.
Yeah, and this conversation has been pretty abstract at a high level. Let's come back next week, Stefan, and actually unpack the internals of the skill that you've constructed. What makes it coherent? What's the underlying architecture that's baked into it? Why is it a good skill as opposed to a mediocre one? And to help illustrate it with actual internals what we've just spoken about conceptually.
Sounds fun. I like it.
Let's make sense of this.
Let's make sense.